Broadcasting from Millennium Student Center at the University of Missouri, St. Louis, and online at umslradio.org. We are the voice of UMSL. We are UMSL Radio.
The opinions expressed on this program are the views of the host and not necessarily the views of the University of Missouri St. Louis or this station.
What's up, everybody? Welcome to another installment of That Science and Nature Show. I'm your host, Jeremy Howard, and joining me this week, as always, the Queen of Tarantulas, Becky Hansis-O'Neill.
What's up?
And Microbe Master, Webster Heffern.
Hi, everybody.
So, we got a great episode in store for you today. We're going to talk about a giant chain reaction involving lions, zebras, and ants. Oh my, I botched that joke so badly. The fountain of youth being caused potentially, or being cured, or being in... Man, I'm really botching this intro today. The fountain of youth being linked to T cells, and also the Doomsday clock. Topic of the show this week is going to be all about viruses, what they are, their historical prevalence, how they exist today, all that good stuff. And then we'll do outside of science, as we always do. So jumping right in, our first article today comes to us from The Guardian, brought to you by Becky. Thank you, Becky, for sending me this, because this is a very cool article that I wanted to share. So the idea behind this article is that we are looking at this giant ecological chain reaction involving lions, zebras, and ants. And there's going to be a bit of an explanation, so bear with me.
And acacia trees.
And
acacia
trees
are important.
Is that how you say it?
That's how I've said it, but...
Okay. I'm just going to go with that.
Okay.
You have more experience with acacia trees than I do. So the idea is we know in nature that you know about food webs and food chains and all that, and there's a lot of ecological interactions between different species, plants, animals, all that. So the idea is basically this, that you have the acacia trees, and they are guarded by this one set of ants. I believe they're called big-headed ants, or is that the second type of ant?
The big head ants are the non-native.
Yeah, those are the bad guys.
Yeah.
Okay, who are the good guys? Who are the good ants?
Just call them the acacia ants.
Okay,
Yeah.
So we have the acacia trees, and they are guarded by acacia ants. Now, this relationship is important because elephants like to come and eat the acacia trees. The ants protect the trees by basically biting the elephants so they stay away.
Can I provide some super cool details
please.
about this process? So, acacia trees have thorns. The acacia ants live in the thorns, and if anything disturbs the trees, they come piling out of these holes in the thorns and sting the crap out of whatever it is. Elephants have tough skin, so you may be wondering, does a stinging ant really bother an elephant? And the answer is yes, because they crawl up their nose and sting them from inside the trunk.
That's, I didn't even think about the fact that the
Highly
elephants have the tough skin. I was thinking they're just getting stung on their skin, but no, that does not sound fun.
Yes, so the ants basically attack the elephant and crawl up their nose, apparently. Didn't know that. And that kind of, naturally deters the elephants from eating the trees. However, there's a second type of ant. These are the big-headed ants. These are, as Webster said, the bad guys, quote-unquote. They're an invasive species. And when they are in the same tree as the acacia ants, they basically drive the acacia ants out. And when the acacia ants are gone, the big-headed ants are just hanging out in the tree, but they don't really care about the acacia tree. They don't protect it. I should also mention the acacia tree gives the ants nectar, so they're not just protecting the tree for nothing. They're actually getting something out of it. Anyway, back to the big-headed ants. The big-headed ants basically don't protect the tree, so they're just using it for shelter. And then the elephants, because they don't have a defense against the acacia tree doesn't have its usual defense, the elephants can come and eat the tree. In turn, how this influences the lions and the zebras is that basically the scientists did all this modeling with areas that have big-headed ants versus the acacia ants, and when there's the big-headed ants prevalent, the elephants eat all the vegetation and the trees there, which means it's much more visible and much more open on the savanna. So in this way, lions, when it's much more visible, have easy prey for the zebras that they eat. I have all that right, or no?
So they actually have limited hunting success when there's high visibility because there's nowhere for them to hide. So they get less zebras.
Yes, I'm flip-flopping this. Yeah. So less visibility, lions get less food. So...
Nope, less visibility.
I'm already screaming.
More visibility, lions get less
save
food.
me, I'm drowning here.
So long story short, the lions need a place to hide. So when the acacia trees are gone because the elephants have knocked them over because the ants are not protecting them, then the lions have less hunting success because they can't hide in the trees.
Yes.
To ambush the zebras.
Exactly. So very complex ecological web, as you noticed that I botched multiple times. So what did we think about all of this kind of twisted tree of relationships?
Well, for me, the topic of biodiversity comes up. And I'm not always the biggest fan of protecting biodiversity over protecting just raw tree mass, but this is a great example of how biodiversity is extremely important. These ecologies are not as simple as you'd imagine. This sounds extremely complex. You've got, 5, 6 species interacting here. And just one invasive comes in, takes down another species that now exposes the other species, that now exposes the lions, and they can't hunt the zebras. And next, the zebras are going to start overpopulating. It's just amazing how complex these webs get.
Yeah. And have either of you heard of the rivet hypothesis?
No.
I bet you have, just maybe in different
Probably.
terms. So it's this idea that a functioning ecosystem is like an airplane, and you can lose a few rivets, and it's still going to function properly and exist and be fine. But eventually, you have lost one rivet too many, or like in this case with the ants, you've lost the wrong rivet. It was a really important rivet, and your plane falls apart. So yeah, just like what Webster was saying, sometimes conserving biodiversity is you're conserving relationships that you don't know about more than you care about some random frog or an ant or a plant, whatever.
Yeah, the domino effect of reading this was absolutely fascinating, despite the fact that I clearly did not understand it entirely as I tried to explain it. But it's always really cool how you think this one little piece, influences this thing like many levels over. I always find that super fascinating for, protecting everything with biodiversity when Webster was talking about that.
I'm curious, morbidly curious, what's going to happen next? Are these larger zebra populations now going to start eating things that they shouldn't be eating?
Yeah, and they mentioned there's other things that eat the acacia trees, and they actually had a different common name for their acacia trees, so bear with me if you know them by a different name. But apparently giraffes and there's some other herbivores that eat the leaves, so now we're going to have them shifting somewhere else because there's nothing to eat if the acacias are gone. And then like horse-like animals are going to overgraze. So I think that's going to be our bigger problem.
And what do you know what the elephants eat when they can't get to the acacia trees?
I'm not sure. I think they're generalists, so I think they figure out lots of different things to eat.
Okay.
Even if they bulldoze their acacia trees.
Yeah, my thought was just they probably eat any other tree that's in the vicinity, so they'll probably just go for whatever is available. But I'm sure they would like to eat acacia trees if they could.
Is there anything we can do about species like these big-headed ants?
That's a really good question. I know there's other invasive ants in other parts of the world and mitigation, but I don't know the details of what people are actually doing.
Yeah, it's kind of an ecological nightmare to figure that out. How do you combat the invasive species? Because we don't always know. One thing I was going to mention, and Becky and Webster, feel free to educate me on this, is it seems like they didn't actually do an empirical experiment on this. In other words, they didn't actually collect data on the lack of, or how the zebras and the lions were affected by the ants. They ran a bunch of models. So I guess sometimes I get a little skeptical when I read model papers because my gut reaction is well, this didn't actually happen. You just ran a computer simulation. You didn't actually do the thing.
It was more than that.
Was it?
Yeah.
Okay.
So they did do some modeling, especially with the lions and the hunting success in different types of cover. But they did actually go look at, I don't know what you want to call it, population densities, I think, of the trees in plots that had different arrangements of animals. So some with the big-headed ants, some with the acacia ants. So they did go do some ground truthing for the basic data.
Okay. Cool. Yeah, I just wasn't sure about that because, yeah, like I said, modeling is super important in science research, which for the audience, modeling is basically running a computer program or math to figure out future outcomes of things based on data you input in variables and all that. Giving a very simple explanation of a model.
And some of the modeling they did with the zebras and lions, they made a very particular point where they're we made sure we looked at zebra and lion movements across our landscape, and it's not just that there's less zebras in these areas or more lions or this or that. So they did as much as they possibly could.
Okay. Cool. Okay, moving on to the second news story today. This comes to us from Science Daily. The title of this is "The Fountain of Youth is ... a T cell." So Webster, I'm going to ask you a question real quick for the audience. What's a T cell?
All right. Well, T cells are our local adaptive immunity. So you hear about B cells, which release antibodies. These are adaptive cells which will gradually make more and more effective antibodies that then travel through the bloodstream and can target things anywhere. T cells, on the other hand, will evolve inside your body just like B cells will, but they stay localized. And they serve a number of functions. We have CD4 T cells, which will serve to kind of amplify the other immune system around there. They'll amplify the innate immunity. And then we have CD8 T cells, which are cytotoxic T cells. These are going to go in and target and kill your bad infected cells. And it sounds like the cells in this article are closer to CD8s, but they are genetically modified. And Jeremy, do you want to go into what they've done there?
Yeah. So bring it back. T cells all about your immune system. There's lots of flavors of cells, as Webster just described. When I taught anatomy, I always have to write like a giant tree diagram to illustrate all the types of cells because your immune system is super complicated. But just think T cells, just think immune system. So what these researchers at Cold Spring Harbor Laboratory did is they basically worked with T cells. They were hoping to help with reprogramming the body in terms of its aging and senescence processes. And they basically put T cells into mice, into young mice and old mice. And the T cells are called CAR T cells, which stand for, where is it? I'm not seeing the acronym. It's in this article somewhere. I can't find it. What do they stand for? It's not loading. Okay.
There's chimeric something.
This is bothering me.
Okay, so for folks that might not know, what does senesce mean?
To age, or to I always think of it as the cells getting weary.
That's a good way to put it. When I think of senescence, I think of plants dying in the fall. That's usually where I think of it. Did you find it?
Yeah, the article didn't load all the way. It was like half of the page it loaded. That's why I couldn't find it. Okay, so CAR cell is chimeric antigen receptor T cells. So still immune system. But the idea is they ended up putting them in mice, because we use mice a lot as a model for medical research. And they found that when they put them in, younger mice, they typically had lower body weight, improved metabolism, so they, burned energy more quickly, and they had a better glucose tolerance and higher physical activity. And then when they put them in aged mice, i.e. older mice, they found they ultimately had rejuvenative properties with that. So what were our thoughts on using these T cells as sort of an anti-aging mechanism?
I'm curious about risks. I really am. Like, if something goes wrong, if these cells evolve in the body, I don't know if they've prevented them from evolving. You could actually develop an autoimmune response. There's just a number of things that could go wrong by putting a very long-lived population of cells into a human body.
Yeah, that aren't yours. Well, or could they be yours?
I think they're supposed to be genetically modified versions of your own cells, but still to have them have a specific target of the senescent cell. What if they evolve and start attacking the non-senescent cells? Now you have a huge autoimmune disorder, and you have all these cells in there, and they're supposed to be really long-lived. How do you get rid of them?
Yeah, because it's not like your immune system's going to get them.
No, your immune system is
they are the
trained. Yeah.
Yeah, that's interesting. And I am not a T cell aficionado. So we make these on our own and just at presumably low rates. Is that?
Or they probably
T cells, a lot of them are made really early in life, and the evolution happens later in life. But the kind of primordial T cells are made. You have hematopoietic stem cells, which are in your bone marrow, and then at some point during the developmental process, you end up with T cells in the thymus, and this is where they mature, and that's why they're called T cells. In the thymus, it's a little heart-shaped organ in your rib cage, kind of right in front of your heart. After they mature there, they go out to the lymph nodes. And once they're in the lymph nodes, then they can start proliferating. But they're never going to become anything other than a derivative of their original immune response.
Okay. So, and I know the thymus kind of stops doing stuff as you age. So is that why we don't produce as many of these CAR cells as adults?
Well, these are called CAR. I believe these CAR cells are not things that we...
Okay, they're different.
They're different. That's why they're called chimeric, because they're modified them. Yeah.
All right, I see. That was a big misconception that I had about this study, that these are complete mishmash T cells. Yeah, that freaks
these
me
are
out.
edited T cells that they're considering putting into people. I would not want to be a candidate for that.
Yeah.
I'll let my cells senesce.
Senesce gracefully.
Some very gnarly things could happen to you if that goes wrong. You are right. What do you think, Jeremy?
I guess my thought, which is just going to be the next question, is what are your thoughts on just doing anti-aging research in general? Not necessarily with T cells, but do you think this is a good idea? Do you think we're barking up the wrong tree? Do you think it's inhuman to do this?
Oh, if we can, do this without causing major autoimmune reactions in people, this seems kind of nice.
Yeah, I mean, it does sound really nice if it were to work, for sure. And if they have controls against all of the things that I'm worried about, then go for it.
The major worry being the immune response, potentially.
The autoimmune response.
Autoimmune response.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I'm always curious about these anti-aging things because I just wonder, side effects, yes, but also, how well they work, who gets access to them. This is probably an aspect of money. I just think of, cosmetic type things people do to make themselves look younger, and then this is, the next step of that.
Maybe this is why Keith Richards is still alive. He's able to pay for some magic
some CAR T cells.
How old is he?
I don't know at this point. Okay, we can look it up.
Look this up.
Keith Richards' age, 80 years old.
Okay.
So yeah, he's been around. I don't know. I think it would be kind of for me like the ending of The Good Place, where they eventually are so satisfied.
Spoilers for The Good Place.
Oh yeah.
A great show, though. I love The Good Place.
Okay, I'm giving the spoilers a moment to breathe so people can pause or skip. But basically, the folks in heaven get so satisfied with life, they've done everything, that they just eventually they're at peace and they want to go be part of the universe and oblivion.
Yeah, that was a very beautiful ending, and just kind of a good, it's okay that life is not permanent, and that's what makes it kind of worth living, and strangely enough, the afterlife worth, passing up, because, once you kind of feel satisfied, you can just sort of let go and be part of the universe.
Yeah, I don't know if I could be immortal like that, how long I'd go, 300 years, 2,000. I'm not sure how long before I'd be like, it's time for Becky to go to the great beyond.
Well, if you're forgetful, you could be around forever, because you forget the good things you've done. Hey, I want to try that again.
Yeah, I mean, does your brain eventually run out of hard drive space at that point?
I don't know. I've often wondered if the brain itself is the hard drive.
Oh, yeah, I could see that, because memories are they're more probabilistic connections that are triggered by stimuli than they are something hardwired into that are physically in the brain.
Yeah, memory's really complicated. I don't get it, and I'm not sure. I've often wondered, you talk about... Well, we're way off topic at this point.
It's fine. It's a good conversation.
I've often wondered about the potential of cell membranes to hold on to memory.
You would know more about that than me, but I'm thinking about how that might work.
We hear about van der Waal heterostructures in the literature, and a cell membrane is basically an orthogonal projection of one of those. So could this possibly... could the literal arrangement of the fatty acids somehow affect the way the membrane potential then is relayed into the neuron, and you get this flux of signal when you recollect a memory that is very dependent upon the structure of the membranes?
That adds another level besides just the interconnectivity of the neurons themselves that would allow some of this complexity, and it makes me see how the sensory system could integrate into that. I could see that working in a way. Yeah.
There were some articles on memories in bacteria where these bacteria were making memories via storing membrane potential. It was pretty amazing.
Ooh, I should read that. Or we should talk about it after the show.
Let's get way off.
Okay, I think we've got the mileage out of the T-cell article. Now that we're talking about memory and cell brain stuff. Memory, though, still a super interesting topic. But moving on to our last news article. So this comes to us from Live Science. This is all about the Doomsday Clock. Now, if you're like me, you're like, there's a Doomsday Clock? I always thought the Doomsday Clock was just a metaphor. I didn't realize the Doomsday Clock was an actual thing that exists. So I did a little Google searching, and here's a little bit of a history lesson. So in 1947, Martel Langsdale, whose husband was on the atomic bomb project, who worked with Robert J. Oppenheimer and all those people from Oppenheimer, like that episode we did 2 episodes ago during winter break, she basically developed this idea that there's sort of this clock, and the way the clock works is that the minute hand is up on 12, and then the hour hand starts at like 9, so kind of like it's 9 o'clock roughly. And then based on sort of worldly events, the clock can sort of the hour hand can sort of tick closer to midnight, and then when it hits midnight, in theory, like that's the apocalypse, that's the end of humanity and all that. And originally it was kind of conceived with the idea of nuclear threat, so everyone was building nuclear weapons, and then more and more countries were getting them, so on and so forth. But also there's other factors that come at play into the clock, like climate change and AI and spread of misinformation and distrust in science. There's kind of a lot of factors that go into it. But based on all this information that they get, they can kind of deem how close the Doomsday Clock is to 0. And the idea is when we hit 0, quote unquote, it's game over, it's the apocalypse. So the article is basically talking about, for the second year in a row, the Doomsday Clock is hovering at 90 seconds to midnight. So it's about like a minute, and if midnight is the Doomsday, it's like a little bit past 11, or between 10 and 11. Is more or less how it's sitting. That's
so 90 seconds to midnight or 90 minutes to midnight?
It says 90 seconds, but the way it was explained to me, I think it's sitting roughly...
If it's 90,
actually, no, sorry, you're right.
a minute and a half
It's 90
away.
seconds. It's actually much closer. So yeah, basically the idea is we're very close, and the article basically cites that the Bulletin of Atomic Scientists, who are the ones that came up with the Doomsday Clock, are the ones that kind of update it at conferences and stuff and tell people about it. Basically, they talk about the threat of nuclear escalation in Ukraine, climate change, disruptive technologies, all the stuff I listed before, kind of getting us closer and closer to midnight. So the concerning part being is that we're very, very close. I should mention, though, as a caveat, the Doomsday Clock can move away from midnight. So it doesn't just keep ticking closer and closer until it's 0. It actually can fluctuate. So historically, there's been, peace talks between the Soviet Union and the United States with nuclear arms deals that have made the clock go further away from midnight, as well as other conflicts that have brought it closer, and so on and so forth. So think of it as kind of like a fluctuating thing. It's not like something that's just ticking closer and closer ever more. Okay, so that was a lot of setup and explanation. So what were our thoughts about the Doomsday Clock being so close to 0?
I always
Shrugs.
I hesitate to take it that seriously. I almost wish there were multiple Doomsday Clocks, because there are different things. You have these different factors that are coming into play. We could be, say, 80 minutes from midnight on the climate change Doomsday Clock, whereas we could be 90 seconds from midnight on the nuclear war Doomsday Clock. I wish there were a distinct Doomsday Clock for each issue. I want to know what is the most pressing, oh my God, this is the thing that's bringing us close to death right now, issue, as opposed to, these issues all play together. On average, our probability of going extinct is this much. That seems a little, it's hard to interpret. Yeah. And it's hard for that to provide any direction to humanity. Oh, there's things threatening, but it's not saying which is the most pressing issue and what do we need to do about it.
Yeah, it's some PR for some things that we need to do better on as a species.
Yeah.
That's a good point. It is good PR for those, yeah.
I feel, though, probably your average day-to-day person, and it can kind of... I think maybe, it's a little bit more... Get some kind of call to action, like the Doomsday Clock. Oh no, what is that? But maybe also, in this day and age, we get so much bad news constantly that we only have limited bandwidth to accept certain things. I've read just the amount of negative news people read in a day is more than some people get in a lifetime from centuries ago.
Oh, that's fair.
Just because of how much access we have to info all the time. So I feel on the other hand, it could just be oh, okay. I get bad news all day, so it's just another piece of bad news.
Yeah. Seems like back in the day, the bad news you got was often very serious.
Oh, yeah, I'm sure. All of your family died from the plague or something. Yeah.
I don't know, I've seen Doomsday Clock articles for a few years now, and I'm just kind of oh, that good old Doomsday Clock. Who cares?
Good old Doomsday Clock.
I shouldn't feel like that, but...
There's this satirical part of me that's if someone hits the nuclear button, does someone get to drive in and actually tick the thing to midnight? Do they have like a little remote login?
I was wondering about that while we were talking just now. Like, while the war is happening, is somebody going to be the delegated person? They're still updating that clock.
The missiles are in the air. Here we go. Boop. Move
It's like a weird piece of satisfaction as they rain down on you. Like, yes, midnight. I was right. I do agree with your point, Webster, on having multiple doomsday clocks might be nice, because it seems like the climate change doesn't fluctuate. It just seems like we're getting closer and closer to zero based on the news I've heard over the years. The nuclear one just kind of, to me, seems like all or nothing. Like, it should just be at 9 o'clock or midnight. Because it's like, either we're getting nuked and everyone's going to destroy each other, or no one's dropping nukes. Like, that's kind of how
But there is the arms escalation. I mean, I think that plays into bringing the nuclear one closer.
I suppose, but to me that always just seems like a shouting match until somebody actually does something. And again, like, that's all or nothing. So it's like, talk is cheap until somebody actually drops a bomb. Like, you know, I'm not saying I want people to be at each other's throats and threaten nuclear war. I'm just saying, like, people always threaten nuclear weapons all the time. It just kind of seems like part of the day and age of the geopolitics. But that's just me. Any other thoughts on doomsday clocks before we jump to the break?
Now you guys have me worried about nuclear war. I haven't been worried about nuclear war in a long time.
It's the existential dread clock.
Yeah.
I think I'm just at peace knowing that if it happens, it's all over and it's kind of just okay. Like,
I'm not sure it would be, though.
I mean, if you die in the bomb, I guess. Like, if you're in, like, you know, a post-apocalyptic Fallout scenario, that's a little different.
Yeah, that's more what I'm...
Okay.
Where I'm at.
Being caught in there.
Okay, well, with that, I guess we're going to give you a little break, and we'll be back to talk all about viruses. Stay tuned.
Did you know that students can often get free or discounted tickets to select performances at the Two Hill Performing Arts Center? For more information, visit twohill.org or contact the Two Hill ticket office at ticket@umsl.edu.
The UMSL Pre-Med Society is a student organization to help all pre-medical students explore their future endeavors. We host events all semester for students to indulge in the knowledge of medicine. Plenty of events are available for students to attend and familiarize themselves with their future career path, such as blood drives, spokespersons, speaking with medical students or residents, and more. The UMSL Pre-Med Society would help pre-med students at UMSL to explore their dream and engage with other individuals within the same field. Search Pre-Med Society on Try and Connect for more.
And we're back with Topic of the Show. So Topic of the Show is our longer form discussion on some kind of science and nature topic. And this week, we're going to talk all about viruses. So last year, when Becky and I first started the show with Eunice and Andrea and Sebastian, we had did an episode all about germs, which is kind of a broad topic about germs, how we interact with them, which includes viruses, bacteria, protists, all that stuff, and how they can influence, you know, populations, our interactions in terms of pandemics, epidemics, all that stuff. But today we're just going to focus on viruses. And I guess I just want to start off to give the audience, you know, a little context. What's a virus? And Webster, just give me like a simple, straightforward definition. I know you can give me a very highly complex definition.
It can be a germ that doesn't autonomously replicate. So this is something that doesn't have its own cell membrane, or it can have its own membrane, but it's not doing any replication inside there. It needs to infect a cell and then use that cell's machinery and defenses somehow in order to replicate itself.
Okay.
I had some general virus questions when I was reading.
Okay. Feel free to ask Webster then, because he's the microbe master.
Are viruses floating around, snags a protein on a cell membrane, injects its material inside? Is this correct so far?
Correct so far.
Then once that material's in there, how does it say, okay, cell, you need to replicate my DNA and RNA and all that, and not yours? So how does it actually get the cell to do?
Well, one thing is, it is like heterochromatin. It is like that exposed, correct me if I'm mixing up hetero and homochromatin, but it is like that exposed chromatin. So the cell is not always replicating all of its own stuff all the time, whereas the virus is just totally exposed. It's like that bit of chromatin that's saying, hey, replicate me now, hey, copy me now, hey, transcribe me right now.
Okay, so you'll have some kind of polymerase running around and it's like, ooh, what's this?
Yeah.
Okay. So,
and viruses often will get themselves into the nucleus to help accelerate their own transcription.
Oh, that makes sense. And then at some point the cell explodes with, what are they called? Virions?
Virions, yeah. The cell will typically get to a stage where it will lyse with virions. But there can be cells that will stick around as little virion factories for quite a while.
And for people, so a good example of a virion is maybe that 3D model of coronavirus that everyone always sees?
Yes.
Okay.
And I believe coronavirus is an envelope virus. This is one where it's got multiple layers of its capsid, and then it's actually got an envelope around it, but I might be wrong on that one.
Okay, so when you get sick from a virus, and part of it is cell damage because it's replicating and exploding cells, for lack of a better, it's messing everything up in the cell. The cell does not work properly. But then what is your immune system attacking? Does it say, oh no, there's something wrong with one of my cells here, or does it actually recognize some of the genetic material from the virus?
Both. Okay. So the CD8 T cell will help recognize that faulty cell and kill it. But you also got to target those virions, and that's why we vaccinate with spike protein, because we're eliciting an antibody response to the virion capsid itself, so that we're now going to have neutralizing antibodies coating all these little virions in the blood, and then complement is going to come in and help take those out.
Okay, so for something like coronavirus, the spike proteins are the little spiky bits you see on that 3D model sticking out?
Yes.
Okay, so we put those into the body with no virus attached, so the body's like, ha-ha, I can find, so when it actually gets corona, I can see it. Okay.
Training the dog to go after the spikes.
Excellent.
I actually didn't know what a spike protein was, so thank you for that, Becky. I was like, is it really that simple? Okay, now I understand. So, Webster, just kind of a follow-up question. There's a controversial idea in biology. Is a virus alive or not? What is your take on that? I should mention for the audience, just because we're talking about biology stuff. So with biology, we refer to something as being alive, and that it has a number of characteristics it must sort of check boxes for to be considered alive. So one is like metabolize energy, like it has to be able to like ingest something and make energy out of it. For us, that's, like food, like glucose, but it can be like other sources of, because bacteria can do like methane and stuff for metabolism, right?
Some of them.
Some of them, like in
do
remote
some really
areas.
Weird things for metabolism.
Basically,
for sure.
people, I'm mixing up words. The organism has to be able to use energy and make energy somehow. It has to be able to reproduce, to like produce more of itself. There's a few other characteristics as well. Viruses, however, in and of themselves cannot do that. They have to infect a host to be able to check all of those boxes for being alive. So I was just curious, Webster, what's your stance on this? Because this actually is a controversial topic in biology.
I was raised to think of viruses not as alive as bacteria as the simplest things that are alive. And I kind of stick to that definition. But I have a friend who studies viruses who thinks of them as alive, and I'm like, if she's a virus expert and she wants to think of them as alive, then who am I to argue with her?
Now, when you say you were raised, like when you're growing up,
yeah, sure. Like when I was in like
fifth
5th grade, 6th grade, 8th grade science, it was like viruses are not alive because we draw the threshold here.
Okay. I think I'm in the camp that they kind of are. I don't know. It just seems like the caveat of like, well, they have to be able to do it by themselves. But they can do all those things just like with a little bit of help.
Yeah.
I don't know. That's just my thought.
I mean, I often actually like to think of something as alive if it has its own biopolymer system, in which case viruses are not, because
What's a biopolymer system? I don't
something
even know
like a cytoskeleton or an extracellular matrix.
Okay.
Okay.
I feel like this is just us interviewing Webster about viruses right now.
I have no opinion on their...
And my stance on the biopolymer system is probably very unique, but I like that idea of a skeleton.
So viruses are responsible for a lot of epidemics and pandemics. So just to give you a rundown of some of them, since we're talking about disastrous things like the Doomsday Clock. So SARS is one thing that the severe acute respiratory syndrome. This is SARS-CoV-1, which is separate from COVID-19. That's SARS-CoV-2. Yes.
Correct.
Okay, yes, they're in the same family. So SARS-related coronavirus caused by a virus. You have your smallpox, which has been around for many, many thousands of years, which currently, I believe, is somewhat on the rise because of vaccines people not taking vaccines, yes?
Smallpox?
There's a lot of random things that keep being on the rise because of people not taking vaccines. There was mumps for a while, I think.
Smallpox was functionally extinct.
Monkeypox is on the rise.
Yes.
Yeah.
And the smallpox vaccine works
against
on
monkeypox. Yes.
Okay. I didn't know that.
And we still have vats of smallpox somewhere, I believe. But you're right. Yeah. Otherwise, it is functionally extinct.
Okay. Avian influenza is another. So when you hear about the bird flu, that's caused by a virus, and that affects like your poultry and your other things that you normally shop for at the grocery store. Ebola is another one. So we had the somewhat Ebola outbreak in Africa, I want to say about a decade ago. And I remember everyone in the United States on social media was freaking out over it because they thought we were all going to get Ebola and die. I was in college at this point. Everyone was a teenager, so we were very smart.
One of the convenient things about Ebola relative to SARS-CoV-2 is that it kills so fast. There's practically no incubation period, and it kills so fast that it can't travel very far. It's very easy to quarantine. Okay, those are the people who are sick. Let's all stay away from them. So if something destroys the world, it's probably not going to be something like Ebola.
Huh. Okay. Good to know. Another one is polio. So this is a very crippling infectious disease that affects children a lot. Famously, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, FDR, one of our past presidents, he had polio famously. He didn't want people to know he had polio, but he did. I'm trying to think if there's any others on this list. Yeah, those are some of the big ones. So with viruses and these sort of viral outbreaks in history, actually, this is probably a good question for you again, Webster. Are there certain patterns, just based on your knowledge about like these outbreaks, when they happen, how they happen? Are we just sort of regularly due for viral outbreaks from time to time?
I'm sure it'd be interesting actually to put them all on a curves of like infectiousness versus incubation period, or like infectiousness versus deadliness, and to see if there are any patterns. I've seen them arranged somewhat on some graphs like this, and there does seem to be a bit of a trend line, and it is a curved trend line, but I can't remember what the two axes were.
Okay.
I have wondered from an ecological perspective if human populations are just so dense, and at this point we are so globalized with like air travel and things like that, that we are just going to start seeing density-dependent disease transmission more and more frequently.
Oh, yeah, I'm sure that it's amazing. And so if you think of these pathogens themselves as invasive species, because we do categorize viruses by species, regardless of whether or not they're alive. If you think of these pathogens themselves as invasive species, we have now given them so much permission to invade.
Yeah, so I think I am convinced that this is not my first pandemic ride in my lifetime that I've been on. So.
I hate that you say that, but I know you're right, Becky.
Yeah, we all get to go back to wearing masks.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's unfortunate overall. So just general question. Viruses, pretty much we established, are kind of prominent. We're probably not going to get rid of viruses just historically, and also just based on the number of people that live on Earth currently, which how close are we to 9 billion? We getting there soon?
I think we just hit 8.
Yeah.
We just hit 8? Okay, I thought we hit 8 like a few years ago. Maybe I'm...
No, I think we just hit 8 like this winter.
Okay. All right, well, we're on our way to 9 billion. So anyway, so how do we fight viruses just generally? How do we sort of coexist in air quotes with them?
Well, it seems like there's some that don't really they kind of go about their business and you don't...
Yeah, some are pretty gentle. They gradually infect humans over more evolutionary time, which is kind of interesting. But they're not wiping people out one by one in our time. In terms of coexisting with them, vaccination is key, and it's really sad. There's all this misinformation going around about vaccines having malintent.
Preach.
Yeah, that's unfortunate. What kind of misinformation? Just
gosh,
there's so much.
Well,
I mean, I've heard everything from the main thing I hear is that their intent is to sterilize people, and they go and they quote these random individuals. It's like, oh, you can find 100 quotes throughout modern history that suggest that people want lower populations. Therefore, it must be the absolute intent of these vaccines to sterilize everybody, and we're all not going to have kids.
I'm sure people have been vaccine skeptics throughout history, but I think the big one was Andrew Wakefield, and I want to say, was that the 80s? I don't know who that is.
I need a history lesson.
There's a new guy, though. He's just as bad, but go on about Wakefield.
So Andrew Wakefield published a study about autism and linked it to the MMR vaccine, so measles, mumps, and rubella.
I do know this. I just didn't remember his name.
Yeah, and the paper has since been retracted, and he's had a lot of ethical concerns come up in terms of funding for the study, and he actually did some pretty invasive tests on the children in the study in terms of gastrointestinal sampling, tissue sampling. So he's been completely discredited at this point, and many other studies have done massive epidemiological studies. And what happens is with things like autism, children are often diagnosed at the time they're getting boosters, because that's just happens to be when we get good at diagnosing kids. They have to kind of hit a certain age.
Right.
So you see these correlations in time with vaccines, but it's not causative. The vaccines aren't causing anything. It's a big coincidence. So that's one of the big ones I've seen is just this perpetuation of this Andrew Wakefield nonsense.
Yeah, it kind of goes hand in hand with what I just sort of heard about, like diagnosing like mental health and stuff. It's like, oh, so many people are, we have like a rise of like anxiety or depression.
Oh, yeah.
Like, no, we're just getting better at diagnosing people that have these. We had it all along. We just now are more aware of this.
I occasionally hear that from an older person. We didn't have as much of this when I was little. I'm like, you did, but people just were suffering terribly, and they weren't.
We were just suppressing it constantly.
If anyone acted weird, you would get beaten by your parents.
Yes.
So, anyway.
So I guess talking about viruses and vaccines in terms of what we know and all of that, do you think there's some kind of disconnect that we could fix talking about viruses and how we interact with them and make ourselves safe from them and all that?
I'm not sure.
I'm equally lost.
Because the people that really need the information think they have good information. If you talk to someone who's anti-vax, they think all their sources and their knowledge are good. They think they know about biology and spike proteins and mRNA, and their metacognition is just so off. I don't know how you fix that.
There's such a big network now and it's interesting. They're all poorly made websites, but there's such a big network of them interreferencing each other. It's like there's a whole new belief system out there. How do you infiltrate that? How do you correct that? I'm just as lost.
What do you think?
This kind of goes back a little bit to like when we talked on the Oppenheimer episode about having a face of like a scientific discovery or something like that. And I know a lot of people don't like Fauci, but I think Fauci at least like tried to do something to educate people and put like a face of like, yes, I am a scientist. You can trust me. You know who I am. And I think generally Fauci was pretty well respected, obviously besides like the skeptics and the anti-vax people. But it seemed like in general that was kind of helpful. So
Yeah.
Is Fauci still in charge of the CDC? What?
Didn't he retire?
I hope he did. That man went under a lot of stress.
I'm not sure.
I can't imagine being the spokesperson during a pandemic when there's like cynicism and anti-vax stuff running rampant.
Well, you're never going to say or do everything right. You're only going to be able to do the best you can, and you're going to get death threats no matter what.
And people are going to clip out stuff and be like, well, you said this out of context.
I hope he has Secret Service protecting him now at this point. I mean, I would not be fun to beat him on an ongoing basis either.
Yeah, I just hope he's happy because he did a lot of work. That seems very tiring. That's mostly what I want for the man.
That's very sweet.
Yes, but also but I guess besides the spokesperson, I guess just sort of hearts and minds, ground roots, like if you can convince somebody, like a family or a friend. I'm not saying it's easy because, if some people are very entrenched in their beliefs, that's easier said than done. But I think it's the sort of ground roots, like baby steps. If you can connect to people and convince them, then it's something. Little bit by bit, everyone can kind of help out a little bit.
Yep, baby steps make sense to me. Not jumping all over people just because they say something crazy to you.
Yeah,
even though you might want to.
Because I did have friends during the pandemic who, like, I went to college with, are a little more skeptical, and like it took them time to eventually get the vaccine, but like they came around to it. It just they weren't like from the jump. So everyone's different. I guess
pretty excited to get my first one.
You're excited. You're
me
first
too.
in line. How long did it take you guys to get your first shot? I'm just curious.
Maybe 3 months. So I have asthma and I'm overweight. So I fell into the category in New Mexico
Okay.
to get mine a little bit earlier. So maybe a month before the healthy young people I work with.
How about you, Webster? How long did it take you to get
I was with I think I was with the normal cohort. I tried to get into a special cohort based on a certain diagnosis, but no, I think I was with the normal cohort. But I got it pretty quickly.
Okay. Because it was my first year in the program when the vaccines were rolling out, so I think I had to wait because they were like roughly early January when like at-risk populations could get them first, like first in line. I think I had to wait until like March or April to get mine. Like it was a couple months in, and I remember just shopping around for places to find it because they'd only be like, it's limited to this clinic if you're at risk, or like there's only X number, and everyone would get them immediately. So I think the first one I was able to find was in Illinois. Like I drove like an hour and some change across state lines like to get my vaccine. I was like, this better be worth it. I mean, it was. Don't get me wrong; it kept me safe and all that. But I remember being like, it's a little ridiculous that I have to go over an hour away to get this. But I wanted it because everyone like I knew was getting theirs.
It was amazing the transition actually from you had these major vaccination centers and there were only a few in a region to now you just go to your local Walgreens and get a little shot. And I wonder why it took that long for the transition to happen.
Yeah, good question. All right, the last thing I want to talk about before we wrap up talk about the show is just scientists researching viruses. So one of the articles I found is sort of like an extra article. This is from about a decade ago on NPR, is that scientists debate if it's okay to make viruses in a lab or manipulate them or make them more dangerous. So I'll give you kind of the crux of this. Basically, at conferences, scientists are just kind of arguing, this is around the time of Ebola, to see, is it okay to do viral research, and what is the ethical limit on where we draw the line? Like, should we be able to make viruses like, oh, we want to see the transmissibility of this virus, like how it can infect other things? Is it okay to ratchet that up on a virus and test that in the lab with the caveat that, like, this could, if this got out or anything like security breach, this could cause a lot of problems humanity-wise? Or is it okay to, make a virus more deadly, like more potent? So, like, if it infected somebody, it would most likely kill them. Like, those kinds of experiments.
I don't know about the deadliness, but I could see lots of reasons to manipulate viruses, like as deliveries for gene therapy, stuff like that. But
Yeah, that's all good stuff.
yeah, but in a deadly, I don't know. What do you think, Wes?
I know. There was a cause when I was reading this, the first thing that popped into my head was that the U.S. government concluded maybe about a year ago that there's about a 50% chance that SARS-CoV-2 was an accident made in a Chinese lab. This was
Wait,
the
our
US
government included this?
Our government said something about
Oh.
this, and I was like, "Whoa! Our own government is now saying this."
So we have different agencies that do different reports on this, and I forget which agency it was that did the report you're talking about, but they basically were like, yeah, we're not actually all that confident that it didn't come from a lab, but there's other agencies that are still very staunchly no, it came from nature, reservoir, zoonotic, blah blah blah. So they're not all in agreement, but it's been enough to make me kind of like, really, maybe it did. I don't know.
Yeah, and if there's a chance it did, I mean, it's like, what do we gain by seeing what happens with a more dangerous virus? Don't we have mathematical modeling for, let's see if it can be successful airborne? Well, we're just about at the point where we know enough physics and material science where we can calculate whether it might be successful airborne based on the protein structure. Can't we figure it out that way? Do we really need to test it? And as long as we can say, based on these mathematical models, there's a chance it might go airborne. Isn't that in all the information we really need to tell the public? Do we really need to say, we successfully saw it go airborne in a lab and freak people out?
Yeah, this is the sort of thing when I read this that, like, the vaccines and the science skeptics, I could kind of see their point on this. And, like, if you read about this as a general person, like, you'd probably be absolutely horrified knowing that this was going on. And I'm not saying the scientists are, just releasing viruses all over our lab and seeing what happens. I'm sure it's very controlled and very thorough. But from the outside looking in, I could see this kind of thing causing problems with how the public views, pandemics and health science and all that stuff.
And the more labs you have doing it, the higher chance you have of one of them getting out. That's just basic numbers. I just don't think it's a great idea. I don't see what it adds to our base of knowledge.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I mean, maybe there's some therapies that you got to do with live viruses in tissue, and I have no idea.
But then you usually test with the existing ones, or you edit the existing ones to make them more benign, which is great.
That sounds better.
Which is totally great.
I mean, the other thought to this is bioweapons.
Yes.
So that's the other side of that coin, is do you want to be the country without the bioweapon? And I would prefer just no one was even thinking about ever using a bioweapon.
Yeah.
I don't think there is going to be a country... Well, sorry, there's no... If you use a bioweapon, it will infect the world. It's just...
Yeah.
So
absolutely.
There's no... It doesn't really matter who's the guy who releases it. It's going to infect their own country, too. So I think bioweaponry it's a stupid idea in a number of accounts.
Yeah, back in AP Bio, before we had a summer assignment, and we had to read this book called The Cobra Event, which basically is about this agency tackling this like biovirus threat from, I don't know if it's a terrorist organization in another country, but basically the book kind of dives a lot into how easy it is to make like a deadly virus and how like portable it is. Like you can have labs in the back of trucks and people can just drive across areas and hide things really easily that, you couldn't get away with like building like a nuclear bomb or something like that. Like it's kind of scary how easy it is to do. And the author, it's a work of fiction technically, but the author basically philosophized that like, likely if the world's going to end, it's probably going to be from like a biological weapon and not nuclear disaster. So that was their thought on what they were saying with the book, which I always thought was absolutely fascinating because I never thought about it like that. I always, assumed we just drop the nukes and we die, like we mentioned with the Doomsday clock.
But in this book, was there an infection process that they described? Because I've often struggled to imagine a bioweapon that would actually totally work. In the sense of you have your SARS-CoV-2 end of things where you have this long incubation period, and then it becomes kind of deadly. And long incubation period is how you get it so that you get everybody infected. On the other hand, if you have something like Ebola with a short incubation period, then it's really easy to quarantine off the people who get sick and prevent the spread. And in order to have something that's a really, really effective bioweapon, you want that long incubation period, but then for it somehow to become extremely deadly. And that seems like a very tough thing to mix.
Yeah, to be honest, it's been so many years since I read the book. I don't remember the viral process. And also at the time, I was 17 when I read it. So, my understanding of viruses was much more premature than it is now. But that is actually going to wrap up the time we have for our topic of the show. So we're going to end on a lighter note with Outside of Science instead of talking about Doomsday Clock and viruses. But viruses, super important biology concept, super important to be educated about in terms of how they work, health, all those aspects. So lots of fascinating conversation. Stay tuned. We'll be right back with Outside of Science.
Hey, if there's any guys out there that's just looking for a brotherhood or just, interested in Greek life, come talk to Kappa Sig. You can always find the brotherhood on Instagram at Kappa Sigma Omsel. We hold weekly events, have fun, and weekly meetings. Come join the Kappa Sigma Brotherhood. You can always find us on Instagram again at Kappa Sigma Omsel.
And we're back. Now it's time for Outside of Science, where we talk about it, you guessed it, things outside of science to prove that we are in fact not robots that do research 24/7. So I feel as the segment we should start out with a confession for the audience, because last week we were all very excited to go to Monster Jam, and we told them we were all going to go, and we were real pumped about it, but unfortunately we did not end up going to Monster Jam. Ticketmaster was selling tickets for $18 to $19, and with fees, they were charging between $20 to $22, so we were paying over $40 to go to Monster Jam, and grad students are very poor, so we were like, nope, get that idea out of here, we're going to do something else.
Yep. And Jeremy went on a mission, could we buy some at the door? Although we did not give this up lightly.
Yes.
But there didn't seem to be a way around the $40 tickets.
Yeah.
It looks like you guys did have a good time. I saw the picture from what you ended up doing after all.
So instead, for a much cheaper alternative, the grad students went to New Year's Bingo, which is offered by the University Program Board, and we played bingo. We didn't win anything, unfortunately, but, we had a good time, I think.
What were the prizes?
Lots of college kid stuff, so mini fridge, dorm rug, pots and pans.
Wow,
TV.
Mini fridge?
TV.
I wouldn't mind winning a mini fridge.
Yes. So it was still a fun, good time. And then afterwards, we all went to Ferguson Brewing Company for some dinner. So that was fun. I feel like that's what we did over the weekend. Did you guys do anything else in the last week?
I was on my way to Ferguson Brewing Company, and then my maps told me Ferguson Brewing Company will close in 5 minutes. And I was like, oh, darn, I missed them. On the other hand, I ended up having a pretty nice day today. I had a wonderful dance class.
Nice.
Yeah. So I'm in a good mood today.
Cool. How about you, Becky? Anything else new?
Nothing super fun.
Okay.
And I did a lot of work. I played with the bees and did lab work this weekend. And I made my slide for a 3-minute thesis, which is kind of work, kind of not. But I finally finished it.
Nice.
So
yeah, unfortunately, I will not be able to come to 3-minute thesis to watch you guys all do your stuff. But I will root you on in spirit while I'm teaching.
Fair enough.
Yes, but you also tell me how it goes, because it was a fun competition.
What's the competition day? I did not sign up because I was like...
It is February 7th, which I believe is next Wednesday.
And what's the location?
1 o'clock, and I don't remember where it is.
Yeah, I'd have to look that part.
I'm going to come cheer you on for sure.
Thank you.
Yeah, definitely, if you're a grad student, come cheer on your fellow grad students, biology or not, because it's the entire grad school, so psychology, chemistry, physics, anyone who's a grad student, it's not just bio. Yeah. The only other thing I guess I have going on is volleyball season starting, so I'm dressed in my volleyball attire because I have a game right after this they will go to. And more important than volleyball is the quest for the intramural T-shirts that we will win if we win the league this season. So we'll see.
Yep. Jeremy has been after an intramural win for years at this point.
Yes.
Is this why you create all these teams, Jeremy?
Just for the T-shirt. Oh, no, not originally, but I feel like at this point that's kind of why they exist.
That's pretty good.
We will see. I guess I'll update you all next week. But that's going to wrap up another episode of That Science and Nature Show. Thank you so much for listening out there. Thank you to Webster. Thank you to Becky for being my amazing co-host as always. Remember, you can find past episodes of That Science and Nature Show on Spotify, Google Podcasts, and Amazon. Until next week at 6 o'clock Central Time, 7 o'clock Eastern Standard Time, we'll be back. My name is Jeremy Howard. You've been listening to That Science and Nature Show, and we are out.